This is Bob. Bob is our handy wooden mannequin, and the model we'll be using to learn some anatomy. First, let's take a brief tour of the basics. First up are the directional terms. Anterior is the front because the prefix ante means before, and that in turn can sort of mean in front of. Posterior is the back because the prefix post means behind. Superior means upper, and inferior means lower, and I really hope it's pretty obvious and I don't have to explain it. Medial means midline, and if you're away from the midline, it's called lateral. Between medial and lateral is intermediate. If something is the point of origin, it's proximal, like proximity, and away from the origin is distal, like distant. If something's superficial, it's not that deep. Superficial refers to the external surface, while deep refers to the internal stuff beneath the surface. Now, onto the planes. And I mean the body planes, not the planes that fly in the sky. A sagittal cut would go like this, and a mid-sagittal cut goes directly down the middle. Any sagittal cut that doesn't go down the middle is a parasagittal cut, cutting this way. So, separating Bob's upper half from his lower half is called a transverse cut. And lastly, an oblique cut is pretty much any diagonal cut. And now, we're ready to go over the regional terms. Fun! So starting from the top of Bob, we have the cephalic, or head. His forehead, which is in the front, is called the frontal. Right here is the nasal, or nose, pretty obvious, and his eye is called the orbital because when you roll your eyes, they orbit. Bob's buccal is his cheek. I don't have a pun for this, it's just a weird name. And his mouth is called the oral, another pretty obvious one. The neck is called the cervical. And I know what you're thinking, but it doesn't have anything to do with cervical cancer, which I think is a bit misleading. There's also the occipital, or the base of the skull. That's another one where I have no weird thing to go with it. And rounding up the upper part of Bob is his chin, or mental, which you can remember because the thinker poses like that, with his hand on his chin. Moving on, Bob's shoulder is his acromial, which sort of sounds like a mule for crows, like a meal for crows, like a acromial. Sorry. His sternum is his breastbone, which is pretty easy to remember when you think of the sternum. The armpit is the axillary, because middle school boys have a habit of using too much axe. The thoracic is the chest, because if you're like me and you still remember the anatomy of an ant from middle school, you know that the thorax is the middle part of an ant, so I guess you can compare it to a chest. The breast is the mammary, because only mammals have mammary glands. Alright, that's enough of that. So if we move to Bob's right side, we encounter his arm, or brachial, because the arm is the part people commonly break. Bob's front elbow is his antecubital, because in case you've forgotten, the Latin prefix ante means before, which is similar to in front of, and you can form a 90-degree angle with your elbow, hence the cubital, because cubes have 90-degree angles. Bob's back elbow is the old cranial, which sounds like old cranes. And I mean the construction equipment, not the bird. And I guess cranes can look like elbows. Next is the antebrachial, or forearm. Going back to what we learned, the prefix ante means before, and we already know that brachial is the arm, so if you put them together, it's the forearm. Moving down, we get to his wrist, or carpal, which sounds like carpool, and you drive your car with your hands, hopefully, and your wrists. Bob's palm is called the palmar, which I find is very self-explanatory. Next is his thumb, or pollex, because when you take a poll of whether people liked something, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down. Digital refers to Bob's fingers because when you get someone's number, you type their digits in with your fingers. Also, don't forget the toes because digital also refers to the toes. Now let's learn more about the lower part of Bob. His crural is his leg. It's like rural, but with a C in front. And I guess if you work on rural farms, you use your legs. This is the femoral or thigh. This is where the femoral artery, the one thing that gets consistently mentioned in every medical drama when someone's about to die, yeah, that one, that's where it's located. Going down, we get to the front of Bob's knee, or the patellar. I like to think of that awkward pat on your knee other people sometimes do when you're sitting down next to each other. Behind is his popliteal, or the back of his knee, because pop sockets go on the back of your phone. Next is his calf, or sural. It's like rural, but with an S, because S is after R in the alphabet, and we went over the sural after the crural. Now the ankle is the tarsal, because you step in tar. The heel is the calcaneal. It's a pretty weird one to remember. I like to think of California canned veal. Yeah, you heard right. Veal from California in a can. California canned veal. If you shorten it, it becomes calcaneal. It works for me. Anyway, we've still got Bob's sole, or plantar, because you plant your feet on the ground. Rounding out the feet is Bob's hallux, or big toe. It's sort of similar to pollux, but it's on the feet, and you use your feet to walk down halls. Now let's turn Bob around. Here is the vertebral, or spinal part of Bob. This one is fairly obvious and doesn't need a weird pun. Then there's the scapular, or shoulder blade. I didn't know this before, but fun fact, in Catholicism, the scapular is a garment draped over the shoulders. How about that? Next is the dorsum, or the back, because the dorsal fin of a dolphin is on its back. Next is the lumbar, or loin, which is located around the lower back. This is because when you chop lumber, your lumbar hurts. And the last part of Bob we're going to talk about is between his hips, or his sacral, because Bob's sacral doesn't lie.